Yep. Today I'm going to talk about scaling analytics engineering with DBT at an enterprise level. So as Gleb introduced me there, I'm Jason. I'm the analytics engineering manager at Virgin Media O2, and the area that we particularly look after is analytics engineering in the data platforms environment. So that's essentially the area that is the horizontal to many vertical teams, but I can explain that in a minute. It's kind of like a hub and spoke model where we kind of lay the foundations. So Virgin Media and O2 have essentially set on a path of digital transformation, and what that entails is moving all our on-premise servers, and technology and anything to do with data into the cloud. Whilst this was happening, we also had the merger of the two companies. So we have Virgin Media and O2, which historically were two separate companies, which have now merged. And whilst doing all of that, we also had to migrate the data, the tooling, and upskill all the analytical teams on the now cloud tech stack. So what tech stack do we use? So what we've ended up with is we now use Google Cloud, DBT Cloud, and Looker. And then we also use Okta for authentication and also GitLab for our version controls. We do have other tools as well, but these are the core of what we basically use day to day, these from moving from on-prem to the cloud. And what sort of scale are we working with currently? So at the minute, we have 120,000+ queries that directly hit our central models, not necessarily these are the hub models, not the spoke. We've found that we're saving in excess of 100 hours of technical debt per week for the analyst teams by moving to DBT in this environment. The 60+ deployments by the wider team in a month, which at the time was very unheard of in an enterprise. We have around 2,000 merges and merge requests in the last 3 months just from DBT alone. 11,000+ pushes in the last 3 months, and we're currently running at 23 or just slightly over separate DBT projects. And all these numbers cover 10+ analytical teams and data science teams. So how do we scale from 0 to 200 in a team of 9, but not also become the blocker due to the size? So there's a set of books that are quite useful. One's called the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project. And the ideals that I took from that and the mindset I've got on screen. So these 5 key ideals, which were from the Unicorn Project, and those are locality and simplicity, focus, flow, and joy, improvement of daily work, psychological safety, and customer focus. And these were the patterns and the thought process that we went through when we started to scale. And it was something that we always kept in the back of our mind of how we need to work to make this a success. So going to the first ideal, locality and simplicity, we have code. This relates to code and processes. It should be as simple as possible, and they should also be local to each team so it doesn't affect other teams. So how do we do that on the ground in DBT? So for locality, this could look like DBT projects based on the team themselves. So each team has a DBT project that doesn't interfere with another team. And simplicity, this could look like a simple communication process that's not restrictive. So for example, we use Slack and we have specific channels within Slack for help and support. Focus, flow, and joy is the second ideal. This essentially relates to working in small batches with quick feedback and reducing the restrictions. So as you can see on the screen there, we have our analytics engineering team, which builds central data models to feed the hub. This is the hub, and then it feeds the spoke teams out in the company, which we also look after. And then what happens is we have this quick iteration. We feed out data and data pipelines and information out to the separate teams. They then improve and add value to that and share it into the central area. And once that's regarded as golden and fully tested and workable code, we then have a process where we bring that back into the central source and use it as a source again. So there's this constant feedback loop of leveraging the other teams and their specific knowledge in certain areas to then feed that back into a central area, which then can feed other teams that aren't specialists. So the third ideal is improvement of daily work. So work should be better than yesterday, and tomorrow should be better than today. So this relates to just constantly the continual improvement of what we do. So examples within DBT of that would be, for example, we have a central DBT package, which is internal to us, and that's built with versioning, and it contains standardized code. We then push that out to the other teams to make use of within DBT, and it helps to keep a central place for certain specific code that then stops duplication and extra effort. Another example of that would be guardrails. So one of the guardrails that we found previously in the on-prem world was there was a mistake where if we allowed teams to access another team's UAT environment, they would then build on top of the UAT environment and then push that to prod. And what we found is a bit of a spider web of data flying around with not much visibility, where UAT from one team was actually powering the production data sets in another team, which obviously we don't want. So we had guardrails put in place now to stop that. But we also have a process in place that people can still get access, they just can't use it in production. And then there's 8 key points on the left-hand side, which are kind of key principles that we go with to help make the improvement of daily work a bit easier for everybody. Psychological safety is number 4. This is often overlooked, but it's really important. So we've got to make a culture that's open and can take calculated risks and allow people to speak up, share ideas, and innovate. If they don't do that, then things tend to slow down and stop, and you find that you don't progress as fast as you need to. And the last one is customer focus. So the 5th ideal, we should always build something that the customer cares about. So when you're building a product or a data pipeline, it should be something that has customer focus at the heart, not necessarily a back-end system. So an example of this would be build data sets and data pipelines that feed into the website rather than data that feeds into an internal report with unknown stakeholders. And then how would I do that when I'm trying to scale an analytics environment in an enterprise? So I always follow the 80-20 rule, where I focused on key 3 areas from the beginning, which was to build the DBT and GCP environments to enable other teams to work at pace, create a cross-team process for communication, and then remove restrictions proactively before the other teams came across the issues. Another approach that we found on top of this is scale first, then mature. So when you're building out a technical solution, you should always, especially if you're trying to scale, build it out in the least restrictive way to what your minimum standards are. Deploy those foundations far and wide across the department or team or users, and then mature incrementally in each area that you then decide needs the maturity to be added on top. So for an example, we have a basic Git development process on the screen. That's what all the teams started out with. And then from there, we've matured that and added, for example, CI/CD on top, different branches, and some teams actually push straight to production without a UAT layer. They tend to be the more advanced teams. Again, this comes back to the previous talks of speed versus best practice. From experience, what I tend to find is speed is usually driven by the business, and best practice is usually driven by the developer. There's always a balancing act of which way you go. So some key points that I'd like to make clear really is don't build tactical or hacky solutions. It just only incurs technical debt in the long run that in an enterprise you tend not to pay off. Always build a minimum viable product of the long-term solution, even if it's not as feature-rich as a quick and hacky version. And an example of this on the ground would be if you can performance tune your SQL code to be 20% faster, is it really worth holding back the release of that code and that data if it's going to take you 3 times longer to develop? So the key takeaways is start simple, get people building with the minimum requirements that you need, then add maturity on top. Create local environments that don't cross team boundaries. Avoid tactical and hacky solutions where possible, as it just increases the technical debt in the long run. Have team ownership with a team that has ownership of GitLab in our case, the processes in DBT, which also have visibility of all the other teams that we manage. And it just tends to be a hub and spoke model with a central team looking after the foundations, and then implement guardrails to stop mistakes, but importantly, don't block progression. So for example, we have CI in place, but it doesn't block the merges. It just warns the people who have done the merge, or done the code, that there's an issue. And then once all that's taken place, and you follow that sort of mentality, what we've ended up with is multiple teams that are developing unrestricted. They've got easy collaboration between themselves, and they're free to innovate all within dbt Cloud. So it tends to work quite well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jason. Again, the scale, just the numbers that you showed, like 2,000 pull requests or merge requests merged in the last 3 months. It's really, really incredible. And I think the one particular principle that's really stood out to me is scale first and then impose restrictions. I think from my own experience being in a platform team, I definitely made a lot of mistakes trying to put the best practices on people from day one. And that is a sure way to not get a lot of users adopting your platform. So I think that the way you approached it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, we found that solution tends to be the overall best way. It's obviously there's always a balance, and when when I'm developing, I want the absolute best way of doing something, but that's someone who knows what they're doing. But in terms of scale, it doesn't work. We did have many of the teams had varied skill sets, so it wasn't just everybody was the same. It was some teams were slower, some of them were completely fresh to these tools, and then some of them picked up very quickly. So like, for example, data scientists, they were more advanced in their skill sets. And yeah, the balance ended up being we have to scale first, get people moving, and then come back and mature, which isn't always ideal. But if you can make time for that, then you tend to get the value quickly, and then you start tightening up afterwards. But yeah, you still need some minimal rules. You can't just throw bad code out everywhere and let everybody run free too much. You need some minimum standards.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Really, really awesome work, Jason. I'd like to transition us to the panel discussion.